Today, I'm honored to be joined by one of the OG virtual instrument developers, Mike Peaslee, founder of Soundiron. If you've ever been in the sample library space for any length of time, you know Soundiron has been shaping the industry for years with iconic releases like Apocalypse Percussion, Emotional Piano, and the Hyperion series of strings and brass. Soundiron has earned a reputation as one of the most respected names in sample development, creating tools that have inspired composers, producers, and musicians all over the world. So, Mike, thanks for hanging with me today.
Thanks for having me. We're really excited to join the platform.
Yeah, really honored. So, tell me, why don't we just go back before we get into nerd talk? What's your history? I know before we kind of got to know each other, you had a whole world of working in game audio. Where did you start, and tell us a little bit about your history?
All right. Well, I'll go back to the beginning. I grew up like a lot of people in our world in bands. I was in high school marching band. I was a percussionist. I got into rock bands. Was a singer, played bass, played drums at different points, and kind of eventually, uh, I'd always been a huge fan of radio. Actually, DJing, radio shows, radio hours, things like that. And so I studied radio at college. Um, and from there, I was able to get internships at a recording studio, radio stations around the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was doing music journalism. From there, I kind of, at that point I was young, I was struggling, to pay the rent and all that stuff, and I took a job as a video game tester at a studio called Crystal Dynamics, which at the time was owned by IDOS and is now owned by Square Enix. I think actually they may be their own thing now. It's been a long time since I've been there, but I joined the game. I joined the testing department and did that for about 6 months before I was able to finagle my way into the sound department as sort of an apprentice. And then I just buckled down and got like once I was in there, it became really evident to me that at the time, this was in the early 2000s, that game audio was still stuck in the past. Like the PlayStation 2 had just launched, the first version of the Xbox was about to launch, it was somewhere around about the same time. The last of the PlayStation 1 titles and like GameCube titles and stuff were kind of like washing out of the studio system, and we were on to this new generation where you had a little more sound RAM and the ability to have audio streams and music streams. And suddenly, like, instead of video games being this kind of cutesy, limited platform, suddenly it was possible to do cinematic stuff. Basically, to start to compete on the same playing field as films and television. And at that time, I became obsessed with field recording and with instrument recording because I felt like really constrained by the quality of the libraries that were available on the market at the time, the sound effect libraries and the virtual instruments. They were very much dated at that point because of what was suddenly becoming possible with larger disk, drive sizes and like better bandwidth for streaming, both on the actual computers you're working on and on the hardware that it would end up being played by. Internet was becoming better so people could stream higher quality audio, etc. So I became obsessed with field recording and instrument recording. I started spending all of my spare money on like microphones and recorders, always chasing lower noise floor and better fidelity. I was there for about 10 years, but really things took off when we took over the Tomb Raider franchise. And that was I won the Tech Award in 2007 for Best Game Audio as the re-recording mixer and sound designer. Because at that time, I was like, I had moved almost entirely to doing cinematic audio and the actual game sound effect creation, voiceover creation and editing and all that stuff, direction, and was basically making all the content that you would hear but not plugging it in. So most of my time was spent like working in like Vegas. At the time was our video editor, not the city, but the editing platform, basically sequencing the audio and dialogue for cinematic scenes and also doing the sound design to go in the game. and some of the soundtrack stuff for some of the games we worked on there. At the time, uh, the guy who was in charge of the soundtracks for like that had joined us in the mid 2000s, Trolls Fullman, he and I started working together on the side, like just recording instruments and like, you know, kind of like wrestling with the idea of what it was to record a really good quality instrument. We were talking about doing choirs and epic percussion and things like that. And so um, around the time I left the game world to go make instruments full time, he and I formed this company called Tonehammer, and we did that for about 3 years. We did a series of choirs. We did a bunch of I think 40 or 50 different instruments, maybe more. I'd have to do a count. Maybe it was up in the 80s. But at a certain point, you know, we had different styles, and my thing was more the weird stuff. Not that we do choirs, we do symphonic sections, but I really wanted to get in the weeds. And you know, our vibe now and mine at the time was I'm kind of like, I was raised, my first job, you know, during college and for the few years after was actually as a plumber. My dad was a plumber, and so I was doing that, and I would like record like banging on the pipes and the hardware we'd have, and that's kind of where I came from, and I wanted to get into the weird stuff. So we split ways. I founded Soundiron, and my partners are Greg Stevens and Chris Marshall. Chris is our tech director who does all the coding, you know, basically engine level stuff and tools like that. And these days he does almost all of the mapping. Like once we're done with the actual sample content, he usually does all the major integration into Contact and stuff. Greg's our production director. He and I work together to produce the content, to record it, and do editing. And so basically the evolution of Soundiron came from like that frustration of the lack of quality. And so I think we helped, you know, just like Cinesamples, we helped usher in that new wave of like cinematic virtual instruments that actually sounded real. You know, we were all pushing toward that, like, can you put what usually would take this vast budget for like a film soundtrack and put it in the hands of the everyman? Mm-hmm. That was really the goal. Because like as a kid and a teenager and in bands and stuff, I would get frustrated hearing like, you know, like Metallica do a concert with the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra and be like, I will never have the ability to do that, you know, or like even like classic rock albums where there'd be symphony in the background. I mean, like there, you know, at the time, even back in the 90s, studios were closing, and now they're all gone, by the way. They're all gone, except for a handful of studios, but none of the big ones are around anymore. And so it was like, how, as a songwriter, do you get to have all these tools? And so pushing the boundary of quality for sample libraries and virtual instruments also meant making it attainable for all of those, you know, people entering the music world or who had been working, you know, for years trying to make albums, but limited to what they could put, you know, in their bedroom or in their garage. Now suddenly you could have a full symphony orchestra. Right. And so that became the purpose of what we were doing, and sort of also created the marketplace in which we could succeed, because pushing the boundaries of quality and accessibility there, you know, made it more possible for people to chase their dreams of writing music the way they imagined it should be in their mind. Not just like, okay, what can I physically afford to do, but what can I envision, and what can I learn how to you know, make on my own in my own home. Like I'll jump back to a quote from Chris Cornell about the Soundgarden album that there was a breakthrough called Bad Motor Finger. And his idea about that album title was that you know, any rich kid could have like, you know, a bad motor scooter they could, you know, show off on. But like the average kid, you know, you needed like a bad motor finger. I mean, it's a little cheesy, but like that idea stuck to me, which was like quality should be defined by what you are able to put your effort into, not just what you can afford to do. And so just like Cinesamples and all the other sort of pioneers in our industry, it wasn't like old school sample libraries in the early 2000s, before all this really, they were expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And big libraries now still have to be, because they cost, I mean, I just want to say, a fortune to make. Like, to make like a choir now, that's six figures. That really is.
Yeah.
Between the recording cost, engineering, post-production, all of that is, so those are still expensive to make. But for all the different kinds of instruments, really trying to get it under $100, really trying to make it so that it was much cheaper to do really good quality work, so that more and more people around the world could do what they imagined they
Right.
could like live out that dream. I'm going to write music exactly in this style. Not, like, if I want to do symphonic stuff, I don't need to go to Juilliard. I don't need to go to Berkeley. I can just learn how to do it on my own using these tools and sound just as good as Hans Zimmer. I don't mean, like, obviously he's an extraordinarily talented man, but what I mean by that is that production quality, that that playing field can be leveled, so that passion and talent are what really can drive a person's career, not just their access to money or connections.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Totally. So that's interesting. You are going back. So your background is in effectively sound design, but you were, I don't know if you mentioned, but you're a composer as well, right? Or would you say you're more of a sound design
These
audio guy?
days, I still compose or demos from time to time, but my creative output has gotten sucked more and more into the sound design and recording.
That's great. So that you come at it from a different perspective, which is probably a extremely valuable perspective. I mean, like most of us come from just the composer perspective, and I'll admit I lack a lot of like all of the stuff that these incredible geniuses in audio understand. I just hire those people. So it's cool that you do that. So then, okay, you started Tonehammer, but then you did Soundiron. But then how did that work? What was like the first instrument you guys did as Soundiron? And it probably, I know a lot of the stories that I've heard from people is that it tends to kind of build upon you. You kind of end up doing more and more ambitious instruments as time progresses. As you learn how to do this thing, and
we kind of came out of the gate, running with Tonehammer.
Right.
We recorded a whole series of different things, covering a lot of different bases. We really quickly started doing solo vocal libraries there, big percussion ensembles. We came out really early with Requiem, our choir. And so we kind of were shooting for the moon right away.
Can I tell the story about Requiem? This is what, 2011 maybe?
No, this was 2010.
2010.
I think is when.
First of all, there's this thing. For some reason, so many developers would make similar instruments all at the same time, even though we didn't really talk to each other.
It was like movies. Like,
do you remember that?
Deep Impact and what was that? The other movie.
Right, like all the sci-fi movies.
Exactly.
But like one developer would make a woodwind library, and then like within 2 months, there's another woodwind library. It's like, how did we all like get coordinated? But
it was a hole that needed to be filled.
Yeah, we all kind of saw what was needed. I remember you guys. We came out with our choir library. I think it was Voxos.
Oh yeah, Voxos. That was it.
And you guys came out with Requiem, and we both built sort of like this phrase builder. And I remember there was like this email exchange between us, like, we invented the phrase builder. No, you blah blah blah. I remember there was this whole silly discussion
there.
It was very competitive time. I remember over like the silliest things. Nothing came of it, but like I think we both made great virtual instruments. But I remember there was like all that drama.
It was funny at the time, because at the time, like, I don't think anybody realized we weren't even like competing against each other in what we did, because like I said, it takes a lot of work to make a choir. You're not just like, oh, they made a choir, I'm gonna go do you. No, that takes a lot of planning, and we were all basically doing it at the same time, because that was the moment was calling for it. The possibility was there. That floodgate had opened. I mean, I think maybe, we had helped do that when we hit the scene at VI Control, which was the big forum, still is for composers. VI Control, we were like, all right, a bunch of stuff, but it was like within minutes that companies like Sonic Kinetic and you guys, and Spitfire were all starting to put stuff out because it was becoming possible. The equipment was attainable. Things like sound devices, recorders, or access to studio space and all that were attainable.
Yes.
And
the software itself as well. Because I think, I don't know if you guys ever developed for Giga Studio.
No.
Okay, so you were, yeah, that was our first. We did stuff, and I think Project Sam is the OG. I think they were doing this back in 2001 when those guys were like in undergrad. Like that's how they started. And but then Giga Studio, but Giga Studio was only available for people that had these high end PCs,
and it just collapsed, right?
And it was kind of like it wasn't much of a market. It was for all the super like professionals. So you kind of start there, but then Contact. I mean, people for some reason like to bash Contact. I think we all built our business on Contact, so we should not bash them because they started from they started with the I think it was a PC version, and then they came out with the Mac version, which like expanded the market. And I think it was a weird like wave that started that we all just kind of rode.
Yeah,
I mean, my view is like we just got lucky and kind of got into the wave with everybody else, and
I mean, yeah,
it grew very quickly.
You guys were doing soundtracks at the time, right? You were a composer.
Yeah. I was in LA for probably 8 years before we started.
Yeah, I think our industry was like some of us were technicals, some of us were composers. Usually there was a lot of blend between them, a lot of overlap in those roles because we were all in various aspects of media at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the technology was lacking, and we all saw the potential and wanted to do what we were doing better without the limitations and costs.
Yes.
And at the same time realized so many other people could too. And we had, we all had developed, the techniques, the tools, the resources to actually, hey, well, what if we make a product? But I think in 2000, and I want to say it was like 2 or 3 is when I had first heard of Contact. And then I went to a NAMM show and saw the big Contact booth down in LA. And I had pulled all the stops out. It was Contact 2. And it was like, I'm probably getting the years wrong, but it was early days. It was well before.
I remember that.
Yeah, well before and so I was like, oh, that's really cool. And at first I was messing with it, and it was kind of, I didn't quite get it. But I was starting to get serious about instrument libraries, and I got like Hallian String Edition, and I got like Artist Drums and a couple of other, and like I want to say like, what was the predecessor to Trillion? Whatever, it was the bass by Spectrasonics. And I think what was it? Whatever their first version of the bass was, and I had a few of these instruments, and I think was it Artist Drum specifically? It was in Contact and it was unlocked, and so I decided, like, I was a tweaker. I mean that in the non-chemical sense. I was like, I would like get in there and tinker with things, and I reprogrammed that whole library because I didn't like the stereo positioning that was kind of forced in it, and yada yada. And I realized, oh, I can do this. I can actually, and so I recorded. I want to say we had a piano at home, me and my roommates, and it was actually inherited from Chris Marshall, our tech director. We all had mutual friends, and he that had been his piano at his house, and it wound up in our house, me and my roommates. And I recorded that, like sampled it, and then programmed it in Contact. That became the old busted granny piano that we still have. That was probably the first commercial thing I ever recorded as far as a virtual instrument that actually became something. Excuse me. And so that's kind of where it began for me, was like, oh, this sounds good. This sounds real. Okay, now where can I go from here? And I started recording more and more stuff. And like at that time, Trolls, he was sort of like delving into the world of, he had been using Giga Sampler. And so he got very interested in, was it FX Teleport, I want to say, where he would have a bunch of different computers, like really, slimmed down, basic. He'd have a primary computer that had all the, as much RAM as it could have and a great processor and stuff. But then each of these computers was essentially just a motherboard, a reasonably good CPU, a good chunk of RAM. And it basically was just like a VST host, and it would
Like
all
just a server rack or
yeah, it was like a
like
much more accessible version of Giga Studio.
okay.
And that, I mean, I don't know if you were messing with that stuff back then, but that like took off, and I did that a little bit. But where I kind of like dug my head in was like recording, editing, and building them as instruments. And so we worked together to figure out what could be done, what could we do, where could we push the boundaries, what was missing, what didn't exist that really there should be, like solo vocal libraries. I mean, obviously there'd been solo vocal packs for a while, but like pushing the idea of like, well, what about like phrases and all these elements and broken up into categories so it was easy to sequence rather than like a pack of like 50 samples. What about 1,000? What about 5,000 samples? And so it was really quickly things started to escalate, and we started having libraries that were like 10,000, 20,000 samples. These days we got libraries that are well over 100,000 samples because
Oh, yeah.
it was always more like, oh well, we didn't get this, we didn't get that. So Soundiron was already like we split the catalog, and basically Soundiron started with like 40, 50 products, and then very quickly didn't slow down because at that point I mean, you could tell I'm kind of a motor mouth. I I am always like doing the next thing. And so we'd really focus on like optimizing features, optimizing templates, things that you could iterate on without without cutting corners, without reducing quality or capability, but more like what can we do to sort of standardize user interface and programming structures and so that the content can quickly, like I can quickly record in detail, but I mean, like I just go when I go. And so
Yeah, yeah.
editing, I have a lot of scripts and tools for Reaper that I use to quickly go, but I'm also kind of a perfectionist. So it was like I can get down in the weeds, focus on this, knowing that I don't have like months of like tedious mapping work because it can all kind of go into a structure, and we can all work as this group as an assembly line to focus so we can put our focus on quality and variety and not just sort of like this long-term tedium of like building things from scratch over and over and over again.
Right. Okay. So it's like building a system that just makes it more efficient. Uh yeah, so then what's your philosophy about sampling? Is it kind of like, to get technology out of the way in a way? It's like whatever's the fastest path from our brains to this thing that now makes
Yeah.
music.
So its user interface is like key. The only way you can come up with a standard or a system is, I mean, it took a decade. Well, now it's been like 15, almost 20 years of like constant iteration on this of, okay, what features missing? What tool does the user need that we're not providing? What could we add here? What would be cool? And so it was all this chipping away, and we were always building upon this feature set and like refining it and refining it. And not always, so in the beginning it was like, oh, each instrument looks radically different in terms of its where its knobs are placed, how things lay out, and realize, well, that's actually confusing for a lot of people.
Hmm.
Like the biggest part of making music, I think honestly, is how long it takes to get things set up. It's friction for the user.
Yeah. Right.
So if you have a clean interface, then you can create so much more efficiently. You want all those deep controls, but only when you want them. So it needs to be able to hide. We worked on like pop-ups and panels where you wouldn't need to open up any of that to get working. But if you really wanted to get in there, it was there. It was available.
Yeah.
And so, and on the sampling side, it was all about structure in how like I got really good at holding my breath to record, so that it was like a very systematic thing. My arms and my hands are very practiced now at precision so that I'm not like spending hours. I'm spending hours, but I'm not like wasting takes. I'm like,
Right. Get it right initially so that you're not.
yeah, so that
Yeah, that's
something,
interesting. You're touching on like a philosophical idea of like um I think there's this idea that we think that complexity is the thing that you want because like, that's what makes the better music. But I don't know, like I've talked to people and I've heard all these stories. Like some of the best geniuses in our world have the simplest setups, I was talking to our buddy Oliver over at Audio Ollie, and who got to work with Alan Meyerson, and I was so surprised about the way that his setup is. It's like he just makes sure that the recording is done right, and there's almost minimal to zero post production in the work that he does, which I was so surprised about. I always thought he went nuts with plugins and complexity and all of this, and it's you know, just an
Yeah,
interesting idea. I always think about that, like there's this temptation to want to, like, oh, I need this, I need that, I need all these other things, but like that's not what's going to make the product better. You know what
I
I mean? Yeah.
exactly. And so for the sake of building these instruments, like I sort of like s- I I just train myself to be efficient, but also like really focus on detail. Like when I'm recording, I don't wear headphones. I'm right next to the instrument. I'm hearing it with my ears, but I also know my equipment, my microphone so well. I know what they're hearing. I know what they're hearing because I breathe. I know, like, we almost always use Neumann TLM 103s because they have really low self noise, really crisp transient response, a lot of, like, very transparent mics. And so I've used those so long and so many times. I just know what they hear. And so I'm right there and I'm like feeling the instrument and like trying to lock in with it to get it sampled in every possible way. But at the end, because the user is going to want those options. But at the end of the day, that's all in service of making a virtual instrument. And I don't think of those as a thing that, these are, we call them sample libraries, but really that's just the current technical term. It's really a meaningless term. They're virtual instruments. And as that evolves, it may not be entirely sample based in the future, but it's still about crafting the instrument. And for me, that's what it's really about. It's like, and why for me, my like I still compose, but more of my creative time is built on these instruments and making them playable. Like for
Hmm.
me, I spend a lot of time feeling them out. Once they're already programmed, does this feel good to play? Does it feel like I can emote through it? Can I express? Is it does it feel right? Does it sound right? Does it hit hard? Like
Okay. So I guess when you're sampling an instrument, you're not thinking, oh, what are the 400 billion ways I could play this instrument? It's
I am
more
that
like
to an extent I am,
you
but
do that, okay. But then do you try to figure out, well, what's the highlights of this thing? What makes it what it is? Like, do I want to perform things that really highlight the character of that instrument?
yeah, and that's how
I
you
mean, I
weight.
always find that to be the balance, especially if you're on a scoring stage and there's a clock, and you gotta get things done. Like, what do you have time to grab to
Well,
make
it'd be
an
like,
actually
yeah.
playable, beautiful virtual instrument?
I
And
mean,
finding that balance.
it's yeah, think about like, all right, so breaking it down to like the simplest thing to sample, like a snare drum. You know, first your primary stick hits, you're gonna get those in maximum depth and round robin. But as you start to get to weird stuff like, flipping the drum over and playing it on the snare side, you're not, that's a special effect. Or like throwing a towel over the thing and then recording damped snare drum. Like that's an effect. You want to get enough depth so that somebody writing a song can really feel like it's got all that. But you don't need like 10 round robins and 10 velocity layers hitting hitting that snare with a towel on it because that's not really how it's going to be used. So it's like you scale the details based on their utility, but
Yes.
always still aiming to be, oh, I want to get that weird creative stuff too. But nobody really also needs something that's going to fill up their hard drive if they're only going to use it once.
Okay.
So
So
you choose
right.
a level of focus and detail.
So actually, I have a question for you. Like, we started to sample a lot of. We're trying to branch out of orchestral stuff, and we've been very fortunate to actually travel to a couple of countries. We went to Iceland, and we sampled some wacky instruments, which is kind of new for us. And you, the way we did is we try to make a plan before we get there. We don't even know, like, how does a tagelharpa work? There's really no standard for it, for example. And then when we get there, we have to like kind of completely change our plan and just do, like, kind of wing it to a degree. And I don't think there's like, how do you handle just generally sampling crazy, weird instruments that you don't have access to?
I mean, it for me, it's a philosophical thing, that I kinda started to catch on early in well, you know what? It was like Tom Waits and, like, Nine Inch Nails that kinda that did it for me. Because they, like, approach music in this so what is a snare drum? What is a hi-hat? What is a kick drum? What is a guitar? What is it? These are, like, in the same way that mixing has philosophical, like, ingredient lists, like, you have your rhythm, you have your drums, you have your bass, you have your guitar, you have these mix elements that fill categories. But what you put in that category, as long as it fits the behavior and the frequency range that that category belongs in, anything can go in there.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
w when you approach, like, songwriting where, like, the snare drum could be, like somebody just going, it could be banging on a pot. The kick drum could be like, it could be a kick drum, but it could also just be like kicking the side of a car where it's a big whomp, right? And it comes down to sometimes that decision of what is that sound source is like an emotional one or is a stylistic one or an artistic one. But if those basic elements are represented, it's going to sound like a song. So when we do weird instruments, the idea is like, one, we try to approach every instrument's like, okay, if you could only ever buy one virtual instrument, I want you to be able to write an album with just this one product.
Mm,
So as much as possible, we try to include like percussive elements, even if it's not an instrument that is meant for percussion. We'll slap it or play it with percussion implements so that you could write a drum line with the content in that. And then the primary instruments, they fulfill these different roles. And then we always include like ambient sound design content we made using that source and then manipulating it into pads and things that are essentially like synthesizers. So you could write a whole composition just with that one product. Because
okay.
that's how I would approach weird instruments. Is like, what role can this fulfill in these different ways? So you look for, what is my primary articulation for this? What is it that I can get the most playability out of? Um, and then you make sure you really represent that, and then all the other weird stuff it can do, you also get nice constellations of content that can kind of capture that,
Yeah, that's interesting. So really, you could probably break down all music into just a series of categorized components,
like colors. You'd even say,
right? Yeah,
yeah. And
like
so any
right. And
right,
then
and
you
that's
would
the
and then you would just find sample libraries and be like, oh, how do we fit this into that? This is a pad like texture, you know? I'm curious, have you ever listed out what those categories are?
I mean, for me, yeah, I would say it's like kick, snare, toms, hats, voice, um, melodic lead, pads, rhythmic elements, textural elements. Like, but it really, to me, I mean, if I'm going to boil it down, music to me kind of comes down to kick, snare, hats, and voice. Because it's really like, if you go to the very first things humans ever made musically, it was that. It was rhythmic elements, boom elements, crack elements, and then this either singing or flute, and then eventually stringing instruments. But those are voice to me. They are the voice of the music. They are
Interesting.
the
So orchestral
narrator.
would fit within a voice
I mean,
category.
depending,
I
but
mean,
like, like the bass and the and cello might be playing pizzicatos, and therefore the rhythm while the violin is carrying the tune, right?
sure, sure.
So it really depends. Sometimes a tuba is a rhythmic instrument if it's going boom, or it's the kick in a weird way. You know what I mean? Like it's a biological thing. It's it's crack. These are things that humans evolved to respond to, and they are things that have a deep emotional and, I mean, I would say genetic component to them. And that stick with us in a spiritual way. That any human anywhere will respond to these core elements. Basically, what could humans make with nothing but their bodies and maybe hitting stuff with sticks at first? Those are still with us today. It's just that we've elaborated and extrapolated on those to, some extreme
That's
detail.
I've never thought of it that way. That's really fascinating. Um, that's a really good that could kind of be the reason why, music really transcends so many cultures. We all respond similarly,
I mean,
regardless
think
of our
about why
background to a degree, right?
think about reverb. Why do we like reverb? And some people think, "Oh, it's because, we built churches and that gave things reverb and we want to no, we built churches the way we did because they are like caves." So like why caves were such an important like religious and cultural concept way back in the beginning, and the sound, the darkness, the way that light would behave in a cave with a campfire, the way that we would sing and play instruments in there, that that that's deeply ingrained in us. We biologically evolved through eras where during ice ages you wouldn't come out for months at a time. Like where winter was like more than it'd be like living in Alaska now, but now you're down in like in modern days like the Iberian Peninsula. Life was there like it kind of is in Alaska now, where you spent a lot of your time indoors and even underground because the temperature was constant. Like so I mean, I'm obviously wildly speculating, but I really think that is the root of why music still is the way it is. Reverb, kick, snare, hi hats, as in the clicks, and then your melodic leads, and pads would just be your chorus around you, the other singers, right? So all these fundamental elements, are rooted, and why music seems to always have these core ingredients is because maybe another, an alien on another planet would have an entirely different musical structure. Maybe not, because maybe these practical factors really do have to go along with the biological organism evolving in a space, on a
Mhm.
planet in an ecosystem where these are certain factors that will come up. You know, our ears are tuned to things like, you know, deep whumps and cracks and clicks because these are things that matter for hunting or being hunted, right? As a prey animal, hearing a low rumble or could be either approaching thunderstorm, which is lethal, or whether because of wildfire or because of getting struck by lightning, or just the weather becoming dangerous, or it could be a wild animal growling. The crack is like either your prey, something you're hunting is stepping on a stick off in the forest, or somebody or something like a warring, a warring, like uh adversarial tribe, or an animal is coming to sneak up on you, right? uh, all of these things have survival elements and cultural elements that are fundamental to an organism, I think, as it's becoming an advanced social being. And the way that we would sort of commune with these has become, I mean, I would say that music is the original religious practice and will always be the consistent religious practice. There's very few religious ideologies in the world that don't involve music in some way. I can't think of any, actually.
No, I agree. There's something, yeah, music has something that is connected to the divine or to the spiritual in a way that very few other art forms are. It's just like directly cuts to the soul. It's crazy. And this is really interesting. Well, I tell you what, can we just talk a little bit about, maybe we'll just kind of get back to talking about apocalypse percussion. I'm curious a little bit about how you did that and how you applied those techniques, because I love that library. It's a fantastic. It's so very playable, and you're doing exactly what you're preaching here, which is you have all of the elements in there. You have sort of the high end stuff, the mid stuff, the low stuff. I mean, I'm overgeneralizing, but that's
But that's how we
um,
approached it.
yeah. And it's, I don't need to know. I don't even know what that sound is. Is it a shaker, or is it you're hitting a drum head with a some kind of weird beater? I don't know, but it's that sound you got is exactly the one you want to get the sound, the sort of that trailer music vibe. Um, so it doesn't matter. Like in the opposite sense, I would say like Cineperc is our full orchestral library, which is literally like, timpani, snare drum, and it's all Western stuff. Yours is like, it doesn't matter what it's called. It just
Yeah, it's
sounds
meant
good. Yeah.
exactly, it's meant
Right.
to fit a category, but then provide options. So, it we got together all the bass drums we could and, like, basically play them all together, like, flip them on their side, and play them, like kettle drums, but like the goal wasn't, okay, these are tuned. It was like, it sounds big. And the
Mm.
idea of Apocalypse Percussion was very much that. It was for trailer scorings and soundtracks, but also for weirdos like me who like things like Tom Waits or Nine Inch Nails or whatever, where you just really want huge drums sometimes. And um it just, like we had like there's snares in there and we recorded a ton of different snares, but really it was in service to get them all in one place to have an ensemble of snares whacking together because that just sounds huge.
Hmm.
Um and so the idea of that library was like, okay, just over the top, like apocalyptic, you know, movie kind of soundtrack where it sounds tribal, but modern at the same time. In the same way that most apocalyptic movies are not like, okay, now we're back to cavemen. It's more like, now we're cavemen, but we're driving like souped up hop rods and like, it's like taking the modern and making it tribal, so that it was like getting all these drums and getting them tuned to the most kind of resonant boomy sound, depending on their category. Like, it goes from like very high like rototoms and octobans and stuff like that all the way down to you know big 24-inch bass drums, um and like everything in between was to get all, and plus cymbals and stuff. Cymbals, different effect symbols like street cross, uh those ozone symbols with the holes cut out of them, standard rides, standard crashes, uh, uh everything we could kind of get. But it was to get these different concept elements that would go well together. And then, the idea that you could play it like a kit. If you really wanted the most ridiculously over the top drum kit, this stuff can be played that way. Um, it's even got hi-hats. Um, so we kind of just wanted to go full on and create this just massive sounding set of drums. And it's recorded in a church. It wasn't just a studio thing. The idea was also it sounds like it's in a space. It sounds monstrous. That's really what we were trying to get at, was like, but again, like conceived as a kit where it's like if you wanted to replace your percussion with something that was over the top and massive sounding, this is a tool to get you there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, and a lot of the sound I think has to do with the room as well, like you mentioned. Where did you record that? Is that
We
a
found this church in Montclair, a district of Oakland, up in the hills, called Montclair Presbyterian, and it's this big A-frame church. You can find it online to see, like, and then like we have pictures of it. I want to say on our website on the Olympus Symphonic Choir page because that's where we recorded our choirs,
Mm,
and others. It's this huge A-frame, but with really unique sweeping architecture that was designed for acoustics. So it's got a big sound, but very smooth. It doesn't have a lot of spaces. Can have a slappiness or a boxiness or a grittiness or a graininess to their decay, and this was a very slick and smooth, clean sounding reverb that sounded
mm,
big, but just kind of like it just sat in the mix right. Right. It didn't feel like it just felt naturally big, it bloomed the tails of these hits without it being boomy. It boomed,
right.
it fleshed out the tone without it feeling like slappy. And
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
it just was the right sound. That's kind of how Pick the Space went to like dozens of different, churches and halls around the Bay Area to pick the right ones. The other one
That
we
sounds great.
often use is St. Paul's Church in San Francisco. It's a much bigger cathedral type scene. So that's a different sound that we often go with.
And you show up with your own remote rig with all the mics, and you set it all up, and so you guys like are a mobile setup in a way. You kind
Yeah.
of
Even when we record in
that's
studio.
interesting. Yeah, so that allows you really full control. Like you're in control of the actual recording process, which is I think that's unique for you guys because most of us, I know us, like we hire like Dennis Sands and we, go and you just kind of get what you get based off of the person you're hiring, which has worked really well for us. But you have control over every little detail
We don't even go
from the
through
start.
builds.
Yeah.
right down to every last detail. We bring our own mics, we bring our own cables, we use field recorders instead of hard disk, or because we won't even plug into site power. We run on batteries. We don't want any possibility of hum
Wow.
or EM like ground loop noise. We use star quad shielded cables. Um, and we record to sound devices recorders because they have the lowest possible self noise, those preamps, and really high dynamic range. And the same with Tailem 103s. They can take a beating
That's brilliant that you
in
do
terms
that.
of
That's
dynamics.
going back to what you were talking about. Because you don't have to do as much denoising in post
Don't do
production.
denoising unless
You don't do denoising.
not unless there's an absolute reason. Like if it's something that's noisy, old weird microphones or something, like a lot of times like we have really low noise ribbon mics, but they don't really make low noise ribbon mics. So they're still much noisier than we'd normally like. I think I use VR2s for ribbons. Because they're like modern circuitry, but their self noise still is 16 dBA, which is like double what a TLM 103 is. That's still considered a quiet mic, but when you deal with sampling, each recorded note is its own recording, and so it has its own inherent signal noise for in terms of that Brownian motion kind of noise for the microphone, that minimum sort of ambient, like entropic noise that you can really get low, but it's always going to be there deep in the bottom. And the same with the preamp. So for every sample, that's stacking up, and so when you have hundreds of voices playing, like with epic percussion, you're playing fast, and so those notes ring out. If that gear is not low noise, that's going to stack and stack. And if you have to
Oh, I
use
know
noise
too
reduction,
well. Yeah.
yeah, and if you have to use noise reduction, all that stuff creates this weird watery artifact, almost like an MP3's kind of like
Yes. Yeah.
warbliness, and it sucks all the high end out if you have to denoise that. And so, in some cases, you use the gear that is available because it's on purpose, like it's a weird vintage mic, or you're doing something in a specific way. And if you're recording in a live space, even in a recording studio, that the building noise, like even in the best sound studios, there will be low frequency noise. The lights, even if they're, like quiet, they're still going to potentially be buzz in them. You really are, it's this race to the bottom for us of like minimum noise and minimum use of noise reduction, because all of that is going to come back and bite you in the ass in the end if it's sort of in there, or you're going to lose fidelity, etc. um and ironically, that noise reduction issue, sorry, um that comes into play a lot with like when we record pipe organs, because and this is something that I think most people won't understand unless they look into it. A pipe organ has to have this really loud noise for it's running on a blower. There's a motor running that is creating the air pressure, and whether or not you're playing a note, that's always on. And so when you're recording a pipe organ, there's always this hum, this rumble that's always got to be on. um and so when you record a pipe organ, that's there. And the choice then has always come down to, do you try to noise reduce that? It's broadband noise, so good luck. Broadband is in like you can't just roll off the highs and you can't just roll off the lows.
Okay. It's across the spectrum.
It's across the spectrum. It's just moving air through pipes and stuff, and like a motor somewhere deep in the back, in the deep recesses of the pipe room that all this stuff is built around. And so you've got to decide, do I want to noise reduce that out and then have my organ sound dull and like washed out? Or do I want to just let that exist because that's what's going to happen in real life, you know? And so our choice is always let it be
Yeah.
because it
Well,
sounds
that
great.
also goes into your choice of sampling, like which pipe organ to sample. To some
Oh,
of the older
I'll
ones.
sample any type of organ I can get my hands on because I
Yeah.
just think they're cool instruments.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we'll choose, but to an extent, is like if I can get access to a pipe organ in a building, I'm gonna record it. So
I love it.
we've done quite a number of them because each one has its own soul. The same way we record different synthesizers, like vintage synths that don't exist anymore. Um, because each one's got its own little soul. And that's the other beauty of sampling and why it's not something that can easily be replaced just with synthesis. Because that's not just what you're not just after a generic, like, as much as I say, that sound is broken into these categories. Yeah, but there's an infinite number of varieties and each one has its own character, flavor, and soul. And different composers want different flavors. The same composer can want different flavors for different songs, or even change. Like, there's an artist I'm super into, called Lorne, and for him the percussion and the melodic structure will be consistent over a song, but what is voicing that will constantly be changing and warping, so that it's like the idea of that core element is there, but it's being re-represented by different elements that are sort of sort of asserting that theme or that structure, but where the voice keeps changing for the voice of the sound that is like kind of guiding the melody and the rhythm. Um so yeah, like, those decisions mean that why will not run out of things to record, because everything you find, like an old beat up piano in the middle of a forest, you're going to sample that. You got to, because it's going to sound weird or broken
Hmm.
or something. And somewhere along the way, you're going to want that sound. And that's not something that can be faked.
Yeah. Well, so then tell me a little bit. Let's just kind of go through the other instruments. I don't want to take up too much more of your time here. We got we have the emotional piano, which you've had for a long time. I think you released that back in 2009 or something. But that was always in my template. I always had it. There's a section in my template that's like I've got like 4 or 5 pianos. Emotional piano was always there. It's just a perfect movie piano, you know, because it's got character. It's not a perfect Steinway and a pristine, right? There's some the lower end is a little bit twangy and stuff like that. So what's the deal with that piano?
Well, so it was like, I mean, I would really credit the sound to Thomas Newman, um, because it was like this soundtrack. Um, like, he would always use these really soft, like, I mean, obviously it's how you play it, but I'm thinking piano choice came into it for that, but like soundtracks where it's just really deep, ponderous, sort of muffled piano, that just it's like it just feels like a memory, it feels like an emotion, and it's not plinky, and it's not jaunty, and it's not bright, it's not classical, it's it's emotive. And so the idea of that was, find a piano that is that, because part two, a lot of pianos can sound soft, but like, so we went to piano stores just trying every piano until, and this it was this one particular, and I don't think it had anything to do with the model, but this one particular Kawai walnut bodied grand, it was like a medium grand, um and it just it just had that sound. It was just very subdued and resonant, but not bright. And so, and to mic it, I put the mics like that far off the strings, and I move the mics. Like, whenever almost not every time, but a lot of the times I sample a piano. Well, I guess, all right, you know what? I'm making myself a liar, because every time I do a piano, we do it differently. It's sort of like, all right, well, what can we do different? Because we don't want to keep redoing the same thing. The idea of the piano, each piano, isn't just that it's a different piano. It's also, it feels different. It sounds different, so that it has a different use case. But with the emotional piano, that was the thing that was calling to me the most. I just wanted a piano that was sad. And so, like, each string is close mic'd with stereo, like these, always the TLM 103s, real close, real tight. So it's, every note is stereophonic, and there's no forced panning from low to high. So, to some
Yeah.
extent that's going to happen because the way the strings are crisscrossed and laid out. But the idea was that it's always there, always around you. You're like in the piano. It's literally the goal that was there, and that it would just be surrounding, but at the same time, still muffled, still, I mean, we didn't do anything special to muffle it, but it was just the quality of the felt on the hammers and the action and the way that that body resonated. It just had a darkness to it, um, And uh because I mean, we recorded like 15 dynamic layers, so it's not just soft layers, but still just the quality of that piano, even when it gets big and blooms, and the high dynamics, it still doesn't ever get plinky or like jangly or like too bright. It still always
Yeah.
feels like bottom heavy, ponderous, kind of soft.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It mixes in so well with whatever you're doing. And I think that's the word I just described is just it's intimate piano because you've got it very close mic'd. And you can't really fabricate that with an off the shelf popular virtual instrument piano. I mean, you can fake it a little by like just turning up the gain really high and playing really, really quietly. But there's no substitute for actually sampling it that way,
Yeah, but then you get a lot
you
of
know?
noise when you do that because,
Right.
so I think that was part of the reason to get the mic so close and to use the gear I did was to really maximize those soft dynamics without having to just crank the gain. Um, so it was the choice of piano, it was the choice of gear, it was the choice of setup, and then um, to get that because yeah, like you said, I mean that was the goal right from the beginning. And also, I'm not classically trained, so I think of and the music that I grew up with, like as I mentioned, these different offbeat kind of artists is it's for me, it's texture. Like sound is emotive, and I feel it in a weird way where it's just I taste sound in a weird way. Like I feel it as a physical feeling. Like any given sound, to me has like a, a textural component to me, like psychologically, and so I'm always getting at like different flavors, different textures of sound, and it really I want it to embody that. So a lot of times people, engineers will go at this stuff thinking in terms of textbooks, in terms of like, well, here's the a proper grand piano and here's how you mic it. I don't give a shit about any of that stuff. I mean, I know it, but then I discard it because at the same time I want to get at the sound. And that can be like done in ways that don't make any sense. Like stereo miking for me is a vibe thing. It's not about just like, okay, I measure, but I measure like in ways that make sense to me, in terms of where I place my mics and how I go about that. Because it's got to feel cool. It's got to sound cool. It's got to sound there. You got to feel it. And sometimes the proper way of doing things based on studio methods going back a century essentially,
Hmm. Right.
um they don't really capture that body because they're not going at that. Like a lot of times when you're miking an instrument in the traditional studio sense, you're thinking, okay, well, these are all these different instruments that go into the mix. Well, I want to make it so that if that is the only instrument in your mix, it fills the mix. And so like a emotional piano is designed to be able to fill the mix by itself and to convey that kind of emotion.
Oh, that's great. Well, I want to continue on to your orchestral stuff because that's like something you released pretty recently, um, which was the through the string. It was the strings and brass, the Hyperion series.
Hmm.
I don't think you did. Did you do woodwinds?
We
No.
recorded it. It's still in post production.
Oh, okay, cool. So what's the philosophy behind that? Because coming into the game, with there's gosh, how many orchestral libraries out there now? How does this set apart from what's out there already?
I would say what sets it apart is it's meant to be very present. And so we approach the miking the same way we do with a lot of things. So really close. One,
Yeah.
every single instrument had a TLM 103 on it, right up on it. And with the basses, two, like one at each F hole. And so, we used a lot of microphones. Um, and the idea was to really get body and detail. And so it's very much not pushed away. It's very much a library series that's oriented around close miking and like presence. And at the same time, we also really focused on being modular, so that it's easy to create with, so the concept of the expressions, these dynamic tempo sort of oriented uh, sort of dynamic figures, forçandos, swells, crescendos, decrescendos, um,
Those are
elements
great.
like that. They're not phrases, but there's a phrase-like quality that isn't easy to fake with the mod wheel, for
Right.
example.
Yeah. I also noticed that in the legatos you've done, I mean, everyone loves to talk about legato, but you've got basically two different kinds. One is a fingered legato, which is more the standard way of playing, and then you have a slide legato, which is something that has been really missing in a lot of instruments. I know that we've never really sampled that, so it's good to have that in there. The slide legato is where you really just transition, almost like a glissando in a way,
Exactly, it was
from one
glissando.
note to another.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The idea with Hyperion also was like, I mean, so this kind of gets back to like one, like Bollywood music heavily uses glissando in the
yeah.
strings, and that really wasn't a way of getting at that. And also very present, like they use strings a lot. And
Mhm.
so, and not just in this background way. So it was a good choice to, I think, have this string library was really about presence and body that could also do that, that could slide and move like that. And I also grew up, in the late 70s and early 80s, surrounded by music that was like I heard a lot of music, I wanna say, and then, like, the elevator music and mall music and all that. It was
Yeah.
very about the goopy strings of that era, slow
Yeah, yeah.
glissandos and, like and so I, like, objectively, especially as a teenager, hated that music, but it still got in there in my subconscious, and it still to this day resonates with me. Like
Never
that
leaving you.
yeah, that swoopy, sliding string section.
Yeah.
Tricky to do with brass, and so we don't have but with the strings, you can do that. I would say that the Genesis too, ironically, we were late to the game with the Hyperion series because what we actually decided back in the mid 2010s to go to work with NI directly. So we did their Symphony series brass and Symphony
Okay.
series woodwinds libraries. So
Yeah.
we did we produced these big libraries, but then we developed it through them. We recorded them ourselves, but and then like even programmed them. But like the idea was like, well, let's build something with them, that could be part of that ecosystem directly. And so we had good experiences with 70 series brass and woodwinds, but those are much bigger sort of ensembles and
So you probably
in
learned
a
a lot.
big
Yeah,
church,
yeah.
right? So that was a very spacious symphonic sound. And with Hyperion, we were like, we did that. We did Hyperion series in studios, very much close and dry, so you could spatialize it however you want.
Yeah, it's great.
So
And I
that's
think
the thing.
it's also good for layering. I mean, I like layering different sample libraries together. There's something about that. Um, so if you had, yeah, if you have more of a room sounding string library, you add Hyperion strings on top, and it just can sound bigger and more massive because you're combining all of these things. I don't know why. You probably could explain better than me,
Well,
but
like,
it's
yeah, I
just
mean,
like,
it makes sense because think about like in a good string arrangement. Now, usually they do it with how the players are dynamically playing because most of the time, symphonic string recordings, they don't really use a ton of mics. And even if they do, they don't mix them in the way that you would think like a rock album or other album would be mixed. But the idea is that the section that's in charge in that moment is louder and everybody else is kind of more in the background. And you can really accentuate that in sort of a modern media production by having like say in any given moment the primary instrument being very much more dry, even if you're spatializing it, of course it still has more upfront presence, and then the other sections can be in the background. So that could be a case where the other sections or the other parts are using more of a room sound where the primary instrument is brought forward in the mix. So you can really accentuate what they already would do in an orchestra recording where or an orchestra performance where whoever is sort of the dominant sound in that given moment in the sound plays up and everybody else is playing down. Here you
okay,
can actually force that perspective with much more control using different sample libraries.
cool. All right. So, what advice would you give to a young composer or a young sound designer who's just getting started? Maybe they're in college or they're just out of college, uh, and they're in this new world of 2025, 2026, and there's so many technological changes. The world has changed in 5 years. It's a crazy time to be alive. I remain optimistic about the future. I think that we can build an awesome future for the world that we live in. But so what advice would you give to someone who maybe is, like, feeling discouraged or is, like, doesn't doesn't think there's the opportunities there?
I
Uh,
mean, you know
what
what
would
I
you
would
say?
say? I would say the same thing that we all felt in the 80s and 90s, I mean, there was punk, there was, grunge, there was metal, there was hip hop.
Mhm,
I mean, things have, like yeah, things are dicey as hell right now. But as a musician, as a creator, like, things have often always been dicey for musicians, always living on the boundary, always scraping by. There's never really been a period of time where a musician can make a comfortable living without a lot of hustle and a lot of
mm,
luck. But all through that time, people are making music because they have to. They feel it. It's not a choice, even when it's a choice. Your soul's screaming to make this music. It's trying to say something. I'm lucky in that I can get lost in the weeds of making the things that make music to get my angst out, to like get lost in. Like when I talk about how sound is textural. So when I'm sampling, I'm feeling that like a song. I'm feeling that physically. But when I'm making music in the same way, it's like it's emotive. It's something that people always have to do, and in the worst of times they do it. Right? That's protest music. That's or just emotive music. That's the scream into the void, and other people resonate with that because they're feeling something like that. Even if they're putting their own meaning on it, the feeling is there. And so now more than ever, all the tools you could possibly imagine to create are there. And much more attainable than ever, cost wise. Things like Musio are brilliant platforms for that because you have all these sounds at your fingertips, and it's accessible, right? And it's affordable. So no, I don't. I didn't get into music. Like the idea was like, I hope to God I can make a job out of this, but I was gonna do it one way or the other. And I think people will always need to make music for their personal reasons and hope to make it a career, but that's not why we all do this.
yeah,
We
that's
all
a good
do this
point.
because we have to
I
do
th
this creatively.
I think that that's really what there's gonna be more of a push for people to do this for personal reasons.
Yeah.
Uh,
And AI
l
music still sucks. It just sucks.
it does. I think a lot of people are using it, and I mean, I had fun with it, but I wouldn't use it for any it doesn't bring any satisfaction that I mean, my philosophy, tell me if I'm right on this, is that, like, it's good to learn hard things. It's like, struggle a little bit. Learn about music theory, learn about audio, learn about the basics. Spend the time tinkering and, getting advice from other people, and it might take years before you become really great at it, but that's the awesome part. That's the part that really brings satisfaction, especially in a world where we are constantly consuming. I think all of us need it's just better for our soul and for our, like, mental health to create. There's, like, studies for this. It's, like, really important, to feel productive. Even if it's just a hobby,
Yep.
you know?
I mean,
Yeah.
it's a hobby is just giving a name to something that you're gonna do. Like,
Yeah.
because you feel like you have or you want to. And the more accessible we can make that, the more people who feel that desire will just have that ability to just do it and not, like, keep putting it off and to not, like, feel like, "Oh, well, but I'll never sound this good." Well, you can sound as good as everybody else, and it comes down to what do you wanna say musically? What are you trying to get out?
Yeah.
I would say also with this era of, like, people, like, entering prompts and popping out formulaic music, um it's like in the early 2000s, there were a bunch of things like EJ and other, like, generic formulaic, music making things that people could just crank stuff out. Um, and the same way that for a minute there in the 90s and early 2000s, house like, everybody was terrified that house music was taking over and techno, and that it was all the same, same, same. I'm not saying that, but it was what it made it so much more possible for people to make music, and it gave them a framework, a genre, be like, okay, I can understand this and I can build on that. And so many of those musicians evolved into much more innovative creators,
Uh,
right?
uh,
And that mutate that style of music, and like garage and two step and dubstep and all and drum and bass all kind of came from that same milieu, and then eventually became what it is today, which is electronic music is this pan genre concept of like a trillion some genres, but you don't have to pigeonhole yourself. You can write like it's in the same way that a rock band can have a slow song, it can have a ballad, it can have heavy song. The same band can be all those things because it's just a way of using the tools to express different emotions and different aesthetics. And now we have all genres are on the deck at the same time, and musicians can create their own new hybrids of any of that, and it doesn't feel alien anymore. You know, somebody isn't just like, "Oh, I'm a punk," or "I'm a metalhead." Like, you might identify in those ways, but there are very few people who would be like, "And I only listen to this one thing." It's not like the old days.
It's true.
People feel at liberty to feel.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Mike, thank you so much for joining us, and just excited to partner with you on this crazy Musio idea. And I wish you all the best of luck, and let's stay in touch.
Yeah, I mean, we're excited to be part of it. I think it's going to do extremely well, and I think it's going to be um, inspirational for a lot of users where they have so many different choices, and it's nice to have one coherent um, user interface concept that if there's a million ways that everybody can find their way of like interfacing with this stuff to make music, and this kind of option is great because it gives people something like that that can fit their workflow. So
Yep.
we're excited to be part of it.
Awesome. Fantastic. All right. Well, take care.
It's great to talk.